Welcome to the One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sallenberger. On today's podcast, I chat with Suzan McVicker and Julia Sullivan about Be, Belong, Become, how IFS resonates with the Indigenous Worldview. Hey everyone. I'm so excited about this podcast. Suzan and Julia spoke at the IFS Annual Conference, and the workshop that they did is going to be included in the show notes. So you're going to want to check out the show notes because what we have there is the 7 Bs of Indigenous-Inspired IFS, which we talk about in this episode. That's listed. What Dick says about Indigenous cultures and IFS. There are links to everything we talk about, to the 7 Bs, to the 8 Cs, to the Been Here Beta 8C meeting flyer framework. And to get more information about those meetings, there's emails. There's also emails about the Indigenous Elder IFS Council and IFS in Business. So all of that is on the show notes. So I highly recommend you check that out. I really appreciate Julia for getting me all the links and all the Google documents. We jump into this episode without doing any introductions, and we jump out of it pretty fast too. So there's sort of an abrupt beginning and an abrupt end. So I want to tell you a little bit about Suzan McVicker and Julia Sullivan before we begin. Suzan became an IFS trainer in 1999 when 2-year basic IFS trainings, as they called them back then, were first offered. After joining several IFS training teams and teaching IFS on higher education, local seminars, community classes, and case consultation groups, she turned her attention to collaborating with Native American communities for mutual sharing of what IFS has to offer to Indigenous peoples and what Indigenous traditions have to offer to the IFS community. Julia Sullivan has been on the podcast before, along with her husband, Chris. She is a level 2 trained IFS practitioner and a PA groupie for Mary Kruger. She integrates self-leadership and parts healing with everything she does. Drawing upon her spiritual practice in an Indigenous community, 25 years in recovery, and an MBA from Stanford, Julia co-founded the Indigenous Elder IFS Council to bring peer-based IFS healing that is easily accessible to anyone. You know, I love that. Julia also leads the IFS and Business group that meets monthly over Zoom to share best practices in bringing IFS to business. Julia and her level 1 trained husband, Chris, take daily walks around a beautiful lake where they deepen their love by speaking for their parts and self while basking in the beauty around, between, and within them. Isn't that beautiful? Like I said, all kinds of stuff in the notes, especially check out that YouTube video. And I just want to give a shout out to Sara at the IFS Institute, who's always such a support to me and to this podcast. So thank you, thank you, thank you to Sara. Also, you can connect with me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter, or at the One Inside Facebook page. You can get a free Get to Know Us Should part and sign up for my sometimes monthly newsletter at tammysallenberger.com. You can also buy my book, The One Inside, 30 Days to Your Authentic Self, on Amazon or wherever you get your books. One of the things I love that Suzan and Julia talk about is using the 7 Bs to help us drop into our center, and they call the center the place within. Enjoy. Hello. Hi again. Hi, Suzan. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you, Tammy, after hearing your voice.
I have to tell you that Suzan, through our work on the Indigenous Elder IFS Council, and as well as her participation in the Meta 8C community, she has become like one of my deepest soul sister friends.
I love
we
it.
are beyond colleagues, and I just admire her to the stars, and she helps me stay rooted, and so this is super exciting for me too.
Is that how you guys met? Did you meet doing the committee work?
I want to say thank you.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you respond to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because we met on a Zoom, and Julia can tell that story if you want. But what I often think now, because Julia and I have been working together a lot the last few weeks, and it's meant Zoom, text, phone, but we've never met each other, and yet we feel so close. And sometimes I see this vision of a herd of horses, and Julia is right out there in front leading the herd. Julia you have all this energy and all this stamina and all of this, just great leadership skills. And then there's me, usually at this point, the oldest person in the room, maybe the oldest horse in the herd. And I'm like, every now and then I'll just do a dead run and catch up with Julia, and we'll just have a phone call or a quick text. And it's like, okay, now I can drop back and just, be either in the center of the herd or around the edges, or, sometimes if things are slow for the whole herd, I'll go take a nap in the sun. But it's just,
and what's good is that
it's a wild ride.
It is a wild ride. And I also, your image came to me that the horse in the front who's running too fast is the first one to go off the cliff. Like, oops, here we go. Stop, everybody! So anyway, Suzan helps me so much.
Yeah,
well,
so
it's a real two-way.
Okay, and I would like to tell a very short story about how I met Suzan, because so I've been doing Indigenous spirituality as my practice since before I found IFS. And so it predates it by some years. And in fact, my Indigenous spiritual teachers, I showed them my 8C. I did this for a corporate client after, the radar chart with the 8Cs.
Yeah, so Julia's showing everybody the radar chart that we talked about in the episode we did forever ago. So want everyone to know what's happening. We'll have to put the link to the radar chart somewhere. But so go ahead. Okay. Go ahead.
So
so anyway, you showed that too.
My Indigenous teacher is the one who showed me that my first placement of the C's was wrong from the energies of where the energies properly go. Like clarity belongs in the north, curiosity in the south. Anyway, so I had all this printed collateral and I had to throw it all away because he said to me, he goes, well, Jay, you could leave it, but I'm just giving you asked me for feedback on the work that you're doing. This is my feedback. And I said, Firehawk, it would make me forever crazy if I thought I was putting something out that wasn't consistent with the energies, as they are. Mm-hmm. And I'm just learning where these, the different directions and what it means. And so I will gladly throw everything out that I printed and start all over again. And so I started all over again. And so somehow people have gotten through word of mouth that I have this Indigenous aspect to my practice that I really bring to everything. And so that's how I got a client who is Indigenous, who is also in tech, lives in San Francisco and everything. And he's the one who gave me your article, Suzan, and said,
because I sent him to you.
So without knowing me, she sends me this client, right? And so then my client says, well, Suzan wrote this article with this guy named Bim. And I said, well, send me the article. And I get this article just as I'm on my way to get my roots done. and I couldn't stop reading it. So I take the article with me and I'm literally in the chair. Now I'm in a pandemic, where I'm the only client in this little house in the back of her house and all this and that. And I'm going, oh my God. And I'm jumping up and down on my chair. This woman is saying the truth. Oh my God, listen to this. And I'm reading excerpts of this article that Suzan and Bim wrote. And I said, I have found someone who gets IFS and gets Indigenous and gets wanting to bring it to Indigenous people. And then I said, I've got to meet this woman. And so I met her, and it was really literally, we began to form the council like members coming out of the woods, kind of in that Kevin Costner, with the cornfield thing with the baseball. But they
Field of Dreams.
Field of Dreams, because it was the Council of Dreams. And it was very much, I want to say, Suzan was such a pivotal inspiration for the council, because I said, this is the spirit in Suzan's article is the spirit that I want the council to have. and to be using as we bring IFS to Indigenous peoples. And so,
yeah. So Tammy, let me loop Bim in here, since Bim and I wrote this article that was published in the Alcoholism Treatment Quarterly about IFS, and how Bim and I found each other. Bim is Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and he had been learning about IFS for a while, and it really felt comfortable and familiar to him. So I had published another article. I don't know which one it was, but anyway, somebody told Bim about it, and there was some contact information there, enough so that he found my business phone number, left me voicemail, and then emailed. And that was 3 years ago. And in the first 2 years when Bim and I started talking on the phone, we have the most wonderful heart to heart and mind to mind understanding. So that's how we came to write this article together, because what we were doing in the article is putting out the call for other IFS people in the Indigenous world, no matter where they were, no matter what their tribal traditions are or who they work for, to please get in touch with us. So that's just how it's all built.
Okay, so I want to unpack what you guys are saying for the
Mhm.
listeners and for me that are like, I want to hear more. So I want to talk about, Julia, just the first thing that you said that I have a lot of curiosity about is the C's and the energy and the circle and how you put the C's in different spots. I want you to explain that to us, for me and the listeners, to like, I don't really know what that means. I want to hear more about that. And then I want to hear about Bim and Suzan's relationship and what those conversations were about. And then I want to hear about the council.
first of all, I have to tell a BIM story, because in preparation for the Indigenous Elder IFS Council's presentation at the IFS conference, we decided that we wanted to integrate artwork, imagery, singing, music, chanting from the Indigenous perspective. That was going to be, we wanted the spirit, and then in business terms, the look and feel to be Indigenous, not to be corporate, right? And so Bim works at Little Wound School, and which was, by the way, founded by Chief Little Wound in response to the boarding schools, and where Chief Little Wound said, hey, why don't we create a school that is rooted in our traditions and that deepens the child's sense of identity and connection to who they are, as opposed to trying to erase it and remove it and punish it out of them. And so that's Little Wound School, where Bim is now on staff. And so I said, hey, what if we use artwork, imagery, whatever, of the Little Wound students? And he's at the high school level. So I said, we'll just get the high school students and then we'll teach them IFS and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I have to have this meeting with Bim about scheduling my Zooms with the teachers, and then when am I meeting with the students, and I'm being myself, and I'd only set a 30-minute Zoom call for planning, and Bim and I are on the call, and I'm trying to talk about, well, the conference is here, and so our slides need to be ready here, and then this needs to happen here, so we need to start working with the students, and then they're going to this, and then Bim's sitting there, and I'm like going, oh my God, and this man Bim, who's really busy with all these students and doing his thing, I got to talk faster. So Bim finally stops and he goes, Julia, he goes, can I play the flute for you? And I'm like, I just stop and I go, yes, Bim. He goes, okay, just wait a minute. I'm going to go get it. He gets up, he goes, he gets it. He's like this, and he starts playing this beautiful melodic Native American flute. And then he's like this, and he's playing, he's going, breathe, Julia. Breathe again, he's like this. And I swear it brought tears to my eyes. And I said, that is the kindest, most loving, beautiful way I've ever been reined in my entire life. And I just was like, thank you, Bim. And Bim, there's this Indigenous way, and the Aztecs also, my teachers taught me that, or the Mayans, excuse me, believed that time was elastic and that time can compress and time can elongate. And so Bim was reminding me that I did not have to hurry in order to get something done. What I needed to do was slow down, be calm, let it unfold. And sometimes things happen quickly and sometimes things happen slowly, but they all happen in the time that they need to. And so I could just calm down. And yeah, our meeting went a little past half the hour, but nobody was worried about it, you know, and we got done everything that needed to be done. And we had this amazing shared experience, you know, and it's interesting later on when I was asked to chair at an AA meeting, actually that later that week, the topic that I made the meeting be is, I told that story and I said, the topic is, who are you playing the flute for? And who is playing the flute for you? In terms of just who's bringing that sense of calm and that confidence that it all will get done when it needs to get done and how it needs to get done if you stay rooted and centered, you know, in the essence of who you are, who they are, the collective, and what's the it that you're doing. It will all happen. It will all unfold if you allow it to and not make it to, right? And so anyway,
beautiful.
that's my BIM story
Yeah.
that I had to share. And then you wanted to talk about the energies.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just going to slow us down for a little bit because I just feel like you said so much in that story about culture, right? Like maybe about sort of like white American culture that's like go, do, hurry, and which is really manager run, like manager driven. And I'm so relating to the parts of you that are like, let me just talk really fast. And so, but how much of that is a cultural thing? And so when we're working with other cultures or we're in other cultures and we're bringing that, I don't know. So I guess, Suzan, do you want to say something about that story and maybe kind of what you hear and kind of what comes up for you as Julia shares that story about Bim and the flute?
Yes, thank you, Tammy. That's one of the things I love about IFS is the unhurried pace. That feels more comfortable, more familiar to me. And the more we study trauma in IFS, the more we know that for some people, just moving too fast or just having events happen around us too fast can actually be traumatizing, you know, and that's one of the things that Bim does bring. You know, he brings that calm, that he calls it center. He talks about self in terms of center, and he just brings that wherever he goes.
Mm.
And his flute is one way that he brings it.
I love it. And I wonder
Mhm.
if in that moment that was him, right? Sort of in IFS language, like his parts might have been a little bit triggered by the energy, like Julia's energy. And I can say that because I have the same energy, like all this energy, right? So sort of, and so his parts were like, let's get the flute. I need the flute. You need the flute. We both need to connect to center. And so then we also know that, right? Like your parts trigger my parts, but then my self energy can trigger your self energy. So let's bring in the flute and let's get, and maybe this can transition us into the C's and the energy, but then let's drop that energy and that vibration down a little bit so that I'm in my center, you're in your center, and now we can actually do some pretty good work from this centered place.
Yes. Like
Yes.
there is no fire drill and we are not in a panic.
Right. Right, Tammy, when you said that, that's our manager parts culturally. I just, that's firefighter parts in our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
having
Got
spent,
that, gotta, hurry
yeah.
up.
And having spent most of my career in the corporate world, it was always faster, better, cheaper, faster, better, cheaper, faster, better, cheaper. And I also was a self-employed OD consultant and executive coach. So I worked out of a home office back when no one else did. And I did not work for a firm because I did not want to be away from my kids as much as a firm makes you be on the road. So faster, better, cheaper, I had to deliver, or I was the easiest line item on anybody's budget to delete because I was discretionary. I was above and beyond what they had already budgeted for their regular operations. And so faster, better, cheaper is so deeply ingrained in my way of working that I also want to say that working with the Indigenous Elder IFS Council, their ability to both appreciate the energy I bring and also lovingly recenter me, doing it in such a skillful, masterful way from that place of self. I don't feel judged for being who I am. One of the Bs is the right to be, belong, become, right? So I can be who I am. I can then belong to this collective council. And then I can become a person who has a broader access to energies that can be fast when needed and can be slow when needed and can be in the middle, when needed. Just a much broader spectrum of way of being and showing up.
I love that.
Speaking and
right.
listening.
And we will go over the Bs, and maybe we'll go over them in the order that they came up, which that order could evolve and emerge differently. But just as you're talking about the gifts that you bring and the pace that you sometimes bring, which we honor and appreciate. And then another one of the Bs is balance, and how if it is moving too fast, as a council, and that's why it's so beautiful that we're working as a circle, as a council, to bring in Indigenous perspectives, that we have the balance of all of the voices, all of the different tribal traditions that are on that council.
Yeah.
That's
And
great.
I'll talk briefly about the energies and the circle, but I also want to say that I am very much a trainee. I am not a teacher in the Indigenous community. I am a student of it. And one of the things that I've come to respect and appreciate is you become a teacher in the Indigenous tradition by your walk and by your internalization of what it is that you're teaching. And there's a lot of other things about it, but there are, and then the teaching, and this is also one of the Bs, which is embodied learning. The teacher will assess whether the learner is ready for another piece of teaching. It's not like you can go to a classroom the way that we do in a traditional sense, and that teacher is going to march through the content whether you got it or not. And at the end, they're going to test you and see if you got it, which means, can you regurgitate it? And is it up here? Not is it in my heart? Is it in my body? Am I embodying it? But it's whether I can regurgitate it. So so I just want to say that everything I learned from my Indigenous teachers, we learn in a wheel. We learn in relation to the four directions and the cardinal and the non-card, which are the cardinal directions and the non-cardinal directions. And each energy in each direction has a certain energy associated with it, colors associated with it, and there's different wheels that we learn of knowledge. And so when I had put these 8 C's in, for me, a radar chart, I had unwittingly entered into how Indigenous people learn things, which is coming from the directions. What direction is this concept coming into me? And then how does it resonate with other wheels that overlay it, right? So for example, in the South is emotions. This is what I was taught. And so in the South is water. So emotions are healthy when they flow freely, not when they're dammed up and, or whatever, or frozen, but you want them to be able to flow. And they bring life when they flow, and they, all these different things, and they ebb and flow as in the ocean. So again, this example of how the elementals, which is water, overlays with the human wheel, which is emotions in the South. So you see that resonance at different teaching levels. And so anyway, when my teacher was teaching me about there were different directions associated, creativity is associated with the East. So he said, you have creativity somewhere else. And I said, oh, I just did that because visually the length of the letters. And he goes, well, you want to put it where the energy belongs. And so creativity went in the East, and
that's interesting. So fascinating. I
think
that's so fascinating.
Yeah, but I really would like us to get the Bs.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, let's
slow it down just even a little bit more about the circle and about what's held in each direction and even the direction that we go, because when this is very new, this look at IFS as the world knows it, and IFS with the overlaps with the Indigenous worldview, and just getting it out into diagrams and the mnemonics, the ways to learn, like the Cs of self, is a very new thing. And each tribe has their own way of viewing those directions and colors associated with the directions, emotions associated with the directions. And I actually feel more comfortable going counterclockwise with them. And I also would put them in a different order than we have placed them. I'm talking about the Cs of self now, back and forth between the Fs, the Cs, the Bs of self. But I think that each person might have a different sense of how to do that, and then each different tribal community. And so I'm saying all this just because I feel like in a podcast, we are calling a circle. We're calling a circle of listeners here. And like Julia said, time can be seen as elastic, and it can be seen as circular. And we can sense ourselves as off of the linear time grid. And I just want to make sure that everyone who might be listening to this podcast, whether it was yesterday, today, or tomorrow, feels that how they perceive the wheel, how they perceive the directions is welcome. Just, the basics of all parts are welcome.
Tell me about the council and tell me about the Bs. And I'm excited about the Bs. I did not go to your council or to your workshop, but Dick kept mentioning the Bs and everyone started talking about it.
Well, let me just explain a little bit about the Indigenous Elder IFS Council, because the 7 Bs were created by the council because we wanted to offer some kind of a gift back to the IFS community in response to really the gratitude that we felt for the model, having received the model and all that it was, we wanted to offer back. And we also were very much in discussion about how IFS is resonant with the Indigenous worldview. And so we decided that we wanted in our presentation to really make that more explicit and clear. What are the ways that IFS resonates with the Indigenous worldview, and how might that be? And it was Suzan in these meetings, and we had numerous very deep and meaningful discussions, voluminous email trails, off conversations, everything in the development of theming, trying to distill to a very wide general global audience what were the elements of the Indigenous worldview that resonated with IFS. And it was Suzan one day that came up and said, well, we have the 5 Ps or the 5 Fs and the so many Ps and then the 8 Cs, and we don't have a 7, so let's come up with a 7, the 7 what's, and then and do they all need the same letter? IFS tends to like the Fs, the Ps, the Cs. So then I think it was Suzan who came up with, let's do 7 and let's do Bs.
Mhm.
And so then that helped us begin to start hanging all these different threads of conversation into the model. And then we went through and had discussions on each one and started teasing them out and that kind of a thing. But what I wanted to say about the council is a collection of people who are, for the most part, trained in IFS, but some are Indigenous elders who are not trained in IFS, but have heard about it and want to bring it in because of the degree of knowledge they have about it. So they're not practitioners, but they are trusted, esteemed, high integrity leaders in their tribal communities, and they are bringing it. So we had Del Labrador just facilitated an introduction to Dan Foster at Fort Belknap, and we just did a 2-day workshop on the basics of IFS for Indigenous people. Now, what was different about this training than any other training I've ever been in of IFS, and I've been in a lot, is we started and ended every day in prayer. And we did prayer in the Indigenous language that was then translated to English. So everything was bathed. It was like they created a sacred space first, and then we put the IFS content and experience into it. And that was different, right? And so Del prayed, Dan prayed, and then some of the tribal leaders from Fort Belknap prayed. And it was just a very, very different sacred space for us to do our IFS work. Charles from the Inupiat tribe on the North Slope of Alaska, my husband Chris and I, who are both trained in IFS and have been PAs and all of that, we are going to be doing an addiction, integrating IFS with the 12 steps with Inupiat values, putting Inupiat values first, and then connecting it to IFS, and then connecting that to step work. And so we're working with 2 community tribal leaders, and we're starting that this week. And again, it's that weaving, that honoring, that the way you do something is what matters. And that's what we are modeling and doing in this whole integration of this experience. And there's also what the council provides is this context where we're all holding that whenever any of us do anything, the idea is we want to come back to the council and share it so that it can begin to be practiced, used, and then designed from with another tribal community. And that's our desire. And so the council representatives, there's 12 of us on the council now. Where we live is all the way from the North Slope of Alaska, all the way across Canada, across the US. And then one of our members even lives part of the time in Mexico, part of the time in the Yukon. And all of us were speakers. Well, we were all represented at the IFS conference. So if anybody wants to know more about the council, we can provide that.
Let me just really back up, because in most Indigenous traditions, we introduce ourselves first. So, in this podcast circle, I just want everyone to know just a little about who I am, because it certainly influences my perspectives, the parts that I speak for, the parts that were hesitant to show up here today. So I've been around IFS for over a quarter of a century. I lived in the Chicago area and met Dick before I left that area, and just have been involved in it ever since, personally and professionally. So I am a Salagi descendant, and Salagi is the Cherokee word for Cherokee. And I didn't know that until I was well into becoming steeped in IFS. So that is more recent, maybe about 15 years ago, I learned that both of my parents carry Native bloodlines. And that is what brings me here to today with this, with the 7 Bs. And when we were looking at, well, how are we going to make this concrete for an IFS conference presentation, as Julia was talking about, how are we going to, have our learning objectives and some diagrams and handouts and things that, people come to a conference to learn and to take away with. That's when it was so clear to me that we have the 5 Ps of self and the 6 Fs of relating with parts, and of course the 8 Cs of self. And I started to think, well, what of self do we have in the Indigenous worldview? And that just didn't really happen. But I thought we do have 7, and 7 is a very special number for many of the tribal peoples. And there are more reasons for that than I could recount, and I certainly don't know all of them. I'm not here as an expert, just here as a person who felt called to walk in Indian country and learn. But that number 7, we are all embodied. And so we know that we've got 2 sides and a front and a back. And those are the 4 cardinal directions, depending on which way we face. And we also know that we've got below us and above us, and we have within us or center. So that's really what the 7 directions are all about, and IFS being about the within direction, or the center, as Bim refers to the self. So that was like a big aha, and oh boy, and oh, these 7. So yes, as a council, we spent many rounds of conversation about what are the seven things that we would most want people at this particular conference to take away in their understanding of the Indigenous worldview and how it is both overlaps and is different from IFS. So the 7 Bs, drum roll here, we've been talking for how long and haven't even said what they are. And if you think of a 7-pointed star, and each point of the star being a stopping point on this trip around the 7 Bs, we did start with blessing, and we went around to the right to be, belong, and become. The third one is humble, with the B in the middle. Belly laugh. And yeah, that's one of our favorites. It's maybe my favorite. And the way we came about it too was fun. It was a belly laugh. Embodied learning, balance, ceremony as unburdening, and that brings us back to blessing.
That's beautiful. Did you guys make an image of that? Like, is there an image of the 7-point star? Yes. Okay. Can you send that to me? So I can have that.
Yeah, I have it in a PowerPoint. I can send that to you.
That would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was collaborative too. I mean, everything, it was kind of like parts work, where you know that you want to get into 2-way communication with a part. So you try to find it and you can't see it, it's there. You just ask it to become clearer, and we all work together to do that, including Julia actually found this beautiful like quilt pieces of the 7-pointed star.
And so how have you and the council worked to, actually, I don't think I want to ask that. I think I want to ask more about the Bs and maybe how you're using them in your life, or how you're noticing them showing up, or maybe even what you would encourage other people to do, like we would with the Cs, about kind of assessing for the Cs and asking how you feel towards. I guess I'm curious about maybe some practical things, either how the Bs are showing up for you, or how you would encourage listeners to interact or kind of have a relationship with these special words.
That's a great question, because that's what I've been thinking about as we've come together for this talk. and which one of them would, has been uppermost for me, because they have all brought clarity about the Indigenous ways, Indigenous worldview, especially after we did the conference presentation. And one that's really come up for me a lot is humble, and how, who doesn't have some burdens around being humiliated? And so to not associate humbling ourselves with any kind of humiliation, but yet it is a humble means to kind of be modest or lowly. And as part of the preparation for the conference, Kristen Burge mentioned this song called the humble song, because we wanted to have embodied learning. We just couldn't do it with the setup that we had for the conference. But there's this group, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce them, the Anishinaabe, but I'll spell it. It's Odemin and then capital KWE singers, and they sing the humble song. And so you get a song going and involved, in embodied learning. And to me, the words of it, we got to humble ourselves in the eyes of our Creator. We got to bend down low. We got to humble ourselves in the eyes of our Creator. We got to know what she knows. And then the whole tone changes. We can raise each other up higher and higher by making ourselves low, by bending down low and having that humbleness to show others who we are, to speak for our parts, to embody our parts, and to step forward with ourselves, self to self. So that's the one that just comes up for me in reflection and remembering that song.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful.
And the other thing that I want to say is that when the council did put the order, right, there was a real intentionality to putting blessing first in the North, because we wanted blessing to be a primary and the first. And then we said, well, then how do they unfold from there? So it is this sense of a cycle. So right before humble is the right to be, belong, become. Because, and we even discussed whether we need to separate out those Bs and have one be and then the other one belong and then become. And what we discussed was that they're so interwoven that we did not want to separate them. And we wanted to go ahead and put the right to be, belong, become, because first comes the right to show up. And I know that me as a woman of color, I have often not felt the right to be. I have felt in, the larger dominant culture, a desire that I be erased, silenced, put in the back, put away, and then when I dared to show up and dared to even earn my right to show up, it was like, how dare you? And who do you think you are? And get back and get away and get down and be small again. We liked it when you were small. And so to me, the power of be, belong, become, and then folding into humble means my desire is not to be the biggest, not to be out front, not to be in the spotlight necessarily, unless that's where I'm called to be. But if I'm called to be, then shine, be there, say what it needs to be said, and be what is needed for the collective, right? For the larger purpose. Don't shrink away and say, oh, well, I need to be humble. So no. I won't do that. I can't do that, because I need to be small, because I need to be humble. That's not what humble is about. It reminds me of, a wise person told me once, humble is about being right-sized. It's about being one among many. It's, a human among humans, a friend among friends, a worker among workers. That's what humility is about. It's about stepping forth and providing what's needed, and then stepping back to allow others, to allow space for others to step forward as well. It's this dance of energies in a very self-led way, similar to the way we do with our parts, right? All parts are welcome. And there are different parts of us that really have strengths that are called for in different situations. And as we allow them to step forward gracefully, they can also step back gracefully and allow other parts to emerge. And I wanted to add that about humility. And, I'd like to give another example of belly laugh because, and you also asked, how can you apply these? So we have begun to have what's called Meta 8C meetings, which are drop-in meetings where anybody can come and speak for your parts and listen to and hear others speak for their parts. And we have a 20-minute speaker, 15, 20-minute speaker who tells their IFS personal journey. What was I like before IFS? How did I find IFS? And what's my life like now that I'm practicing IFS in my own life? We have people who are trained in IFS. We have people who have not been trained and don't even know what it is. They just heard about it now that it's being talked about. We have clients who are in therapy or coaching coming, and it's a drop-in. So people come and leave. But typically what we're finding is that once people come, they want more. They want to find a safe place where they can speak for their parts. So our speaker, the IFS in business meeting was just this morning. The speaker that we had planned called in sick last night and said, I've become deathly ill and I can't speak to the IFS and business group, even though we've planned it for months. And so I turned to my husband, Chris, and I said, I think we'll just have a Meta 8C meeting and show them this protocol of speaking for your parts. And so because we didn't have a speaker, I had to speak. And I told this story of what happened to me this week. My husband, Chris, and I are now full-time doing IFS work. And one of our very dear friends fell, cracked her pelvis, broke her shoulder, and was in the hospital. And so we raced off to the grocery store to buy a bouquet of flowers to take it to the hospital. So while we're in the car on the way to the hospital, I'm going, okay, Chris, while you're driving, I'm going to go through the list of what we have to do. And because, we have a lot up right now that needs to get done in a timely manner. And so he says to me, oh, wow, I didn't think you liked lists. You told me that, you found lists like, you didn't like them. You pushed back the last time I tried to go through a list. And I thought back to it and I said, oh, it was your tone. It was that scary alpha male tone that said, if I didn't make it through the list far enough, fast enough, good enough, that faster, better, quicker, cheaper, that, and then I realized this old childhood thing, the beatings will begin. Literally, the beatings will begin. And so I said to him, I said, oh, Chris, I said, it's not that I don't like lists. I find lists very helpful. But when we talk about them, I just need to ask you, tone of voice. Tone of voice is either going to draw up this primal fear that I have of getting beaten again for not doing it good enough, or it will allow me for the list to serve me. And he's driving like this and he goes, well, isn't that special? And he goes into church lady voice. Julia, always using lists to beat yourself up when really that's not needed. And he did this whole riff on church lady. And he goes, or do I use Yoda on this? Very helpful. Yes, they are. Lists can help you. And he just goes into this whole Yoda riff on lists. And I am belly laughing. And then I start saying, see, belly laugh, belly laugh. And so I told that story to the IFS and business group because they were experiencing the Meta 8C meeting for the first time. And we're supposed to bring in personal stories of how IFS and parts work is changing our life. And so I told that little story and we all had a belly laugh. And it was amazing. People were going, wow, this is so fun. It's like parts work can be fun. We can laugh, we can be joyful, we can do all this. And wow. So that was something that the 7 Bs of Indigenous IFS brought to the IFS and business group this morning.
That's great. Well, thank you guys so much. I think that is a perfect way to end on a good belly laugh story. Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.